Good evening, everyone. We come to First Samuel chapter 25. And as we begin this evening's chapter, a very sad event took place. Then Samuel died. This puts a close to the chapter of the prophet Samuel, as God had used him in so many ways and was there to see Saul through many events until God rejected Saul, and Samuel never went to see Saul again. Now, in those chapters that ensued after chapter 15, Samuel had anointed David, and God showed Samuel that this is the one that should be anointed, a man after God's own heart. And through the next few chapters, we see how Saul turned against David. Now, in chapter 24, right after Saul realized that when David had a chance to kill Saul, but he didn't because of the recognition that Saul is the Mashiach, the anointed of God, that he is, with due respect, honor what God had put in place. Now, after that comes chapter 25. All Israel, this would be all the 12 tribes, they gathered together and mourned for him and buried him at his house in Ramah. This would be in the Ephraim area in the highlands. And this is important because the word mourn, mourn is like lamenting. Every human mourns. Now, in the culture of the Hebrew people, the mourning or the lamenting, and the idea of this word uh, is to, I guess, seriously beat the chest. That's the meaning of the word, right? Beat the chest, tear the hair. And these are very visual expressions of lament. And they cried for the loss of Samuel, the whole nation. And in this verse, it says, all Israel, they gathered together and mourned. Now, in Genesis chapter 50, we see this. Genesis chapter 50 and in verse 10, Joseph and everybody else observed 7 days of mourning. Now, perhaps this would be a clue for us to know how long the period of mourning is in this case. Joseph mourned for Jacob for 7 days when he was buried in Machpelah. And so I think it would be a good view to take that all Israel mourned 7 days for Samuel, buried him in his house in Ramah. And our next event is just in passing that we talked about the death of Samuel. It comes back again in chapter 28 as a reference. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. The next thing that we need to talk about is this. If Samuel died, then Samuel could not have written the entire scroll of 1st and 2nd Samuel. That would be a fact that you cannot have a dead person write that. And so Samuel would have written parts of it, And so did the other prophets as it came along from Samuel to Nathan and a number of them all the way through the end of the book of Second Samuel. Now, so we need to just clear that air that the scroll of Samuel, or what we call the first and second Samuel, is not completely written by Samuel. It was not documented completely by Samuel because he dies in chapter 25. And so he can't write down chapter 25 onwards because he would have died. Now, more importantly, is not exactly who wrote it, but the contents of Samuel continues on to demonstrate the character of David as it moved along the entire course of history all the way to the end of Second Samuel. And so it's all about David because Saul's time will come to the end at the end of First Samuel. At this point in time, Saul and David might have had a truce. At the end of chapter 25, we read that Saul wanted David to swear by God that he would not eliminate the name of Saul, and neither would the descendants. And so that was settled. And so they both left in peace. Now, what is going to happen is that from verse 2 onwards gives us another narrative. This next narrative is about David and what is going to happen with a man by the name of Naval and his wife Abigail. And so let us now take a look at verse 2. In verse 2, now a man in Maon, remember, Maon was at a place where David had hid in chapter 24. Now there was this man, rich man, whose business was in Carmel. Carmel is a hill terrain, very rich, lots of agriculture, lots of pasture lands, and very rich. And they actually plant a lot of trees and fruits there as well. And Carmel is also the place where the prophet Elijah later on had a showdown with 450 prophets of Baal. But in this narrative, we speak of this man, and the man was very rich. And how is he very rich? Now, notice the word is very rich. That's an A. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. This is what it means by very rich. We're talking about 1,000. We're not talking about a few sheep. 1,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. This is a description or a value judgment, right? A value judgment where richness is not shares of company, but richness is depicted by material wealth in a number of flocks. How many animals he had. Now, when it came about while he was shearing sheep in Carmel, so he was actually having the sheep in Carmel, and he was about to shear his sheep. Now, the idea of shear the sheep is to shave off, right? Shave off the wool of the sheep. Now, what you don't see is verse 3. These little, well, let me just point out to you, these little brackets. These are given by the translators. In Hebrew, they don't put the brackets in there. And so what you find is that this is seen as a background story, right? The background story as to who this man is. The man who originally is in Maon, he is now in Carmel. The man's name was Naval. Naval. His wife's name was Abigail. Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings. He was a Calebite, right? Or here it says a Calebite. So let's take a look at this. We know the name Naval, Abigail. This is important because it keeps coming back, so you know who is who. She was intelligent. Now, this is shekel. Shekel means she has insight, right? Insight. And I would say insight of life, right? She has discretion. She knows how to conduct herself. She has knowledge, which tells us also she has prudence. See, this word here brings about all these ideas: prudence, wisdom. She knows life well. She has understanding. And she knows how to conduct herself. She knows the Torah, if you want to put it that way. And she would have a very good sense as a person. So all of these are good description of the woman. Now, we don't read of women very much in the Hebrew text, but whenever they do appear, they are quite prominent. And in this case, Abigail is everything right here. And she was also, it says here, beautiful in appearance. Now, this word here is beautiful or fair. It's like a fair maiden. The idea here of appearance. This word here is more than appearance of face. So let me just explain this. This word is more than face, right? It says appearance. It's about the shape, about form, about her outline, about her figure. So you notice, although we have this appearance, yes, we can also say her countenance. Countenance means face. So we can say that she was beautiful in appearance, from her face, from her looks. She was also beautiful or fair in her shape. That's basically that. And so this woman is, perhaps you could say, outstanding. In contrast, the man was harsh. Now, the word harsh here means cruel. He is difficult. He is stubborn. What a way to describe the man. The second word here is he is evil. Now, notice this is ra, evil. In his deeds, right? In his practices. Now, what do you mean by evil? Now, remember, evil doesn't necessarily mean any moral. He is actually dealing or doing things which can be construed as unfair to other people. He is doing things that is seen to be not right. He is taking advantage, and he can be oppressive. Now you can look at it that way, as evil, right? As evil. So he is described as being a very cruel man and evil in his dealings as his conduct, right? And he was a Kalavi, right? Kalavi is from Caleb, a man from Caleb. Uh, but I think you can say, how could we say, this is also seen as an adjective. Uh, the word Caleb, by the way, is dog. And if you recall, when they sent spies into the promised land, Joshua and Caleb both came back and said that it was good to go in. And they were the only 2 out of 12 who gave a good report. And so that descendant was Naval, right? One of the descendants was Naval. And that David heard in the wilderness. What wilderness? He was in the wilderness of Paran, remember, in verse 1, that Naval was shearing his sheep, that there's a rich man there, and he is busy with his sheep. In verse 5, so David sent 10 young men. The idea of 10 young men, this would be, I guess you could say, young servants who are following him. Remember, David had 600 men. So these are 10 young men. And David said to the young men, there are specific instructions. Go up to Carmel. Now remember, whenever you have this kind of descriptors, go up to Carmel means ascend to Carmel, which tells them that where they are is lower. So you could think of it this way. Here is the wilderness of Paran, and up here is Carmel. And this whole idea, every time you see to ascend or to go up, is literally about the terrain. And if you recall, they will always say, go down to Egypt. And that would be that Canaan is actually at a higher elevation than Egypt. And so this is what ascend means. So the words choices in the narratives really gives us a whole lot more idea of the imagery of the situation. Go and visit Naval. The word visit means to go to him. Visit is to go, right? To go to Naval and greet him in my name. And so it says, greet him in my name. What does this mean? The word greet him is to say shalom to Naval, and that you are coming, you are inquiring, you're inquiring in my name. And so this idea here, greet him in my name, is to greet him, inquire of him in my name. Let's see. The Hebrew here is a bit tricky. All right, let me just move back a bit. This word here, in the English, it says greet him. But the Hebrew says, ask, uh, that they ask to him, Naval, they ask to him in my name with peace, with shalom. So I'm just trying to help us retranslate this phrase. There are a couple of things that we need to look at. Is that when it says greet him, it is all these words that the 10 young men are to ask Naval in David's name, and they come to him with shalom, come to him by peace. And the whole idea here is they're coming in friendly terms. That's what it means. All right. You can't see that in the English, unfortunately, but in the Hebrew, it is about David telling them to go in my name. Now, remember these particular words, in my name. These words are important. In my name. That these 10 young men represents David. So in my name means to represent David. They are there in the place of David. And this is what you shall say. Say to Naval, have a long life. Right? Have a long life. The word here is basically, yeah, you can say have a long life or be alive and stay alive. That would be a good way of expressing it. And then it says, peace be to you. Now, this is a greeting, by the way. Peace be to you. And that would be Ata Shalom. And then there is another phrase here. It says, peace be to your house. So to everyone at home. And peace to all that you have. So remember, this word peace is shalom. Shalom to you. Shalom to your house. And shalom to all that you have. And so David is trying to say, this is how you should go and approach him. Everything is about approaching in peace. Verse 7 says, now I have heard that you have shearers, people who are going to cut the wool off the sheep. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. The idea here is this word here. We have not insulted them. We have not humiliated them. We have not put them to shame. Basically, the idea here is did not mistreat them. In fact, we read that David and his company actually also protected them from harm. And so they could continue to work all the days in Carmel. Ask your young men and they will tell you. And this means they will bear witness. So it is not just a one man say all or make assertions or claims. They can testify. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes. Now, again, what does favor in your eyes means? Find grace, right? Find grace in your eyes. Notice, grace is always in the eyes of the beholder. Let me put it down. Is in the eyes of the beholder. So the young man may find grace in your eyes because of what we have done. And we have come on a festive day. Now, this word festive day uh, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a festival. It is a good day. This is a Tov day, right? A Tov day. It's a good day. They may be having celebration of some sort. So please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David. Now, notice this, to your servants, your son David, they are the same. This is an A and this is a B. Remember, the 10 young men are there to go in the name of David. They are representing David. And so they come in peace, they come with humility, declaring that the young men are your servants and David is your son. And so perhaps you could say that David is younger than Nabal. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. So notice, your servant, your son David, means that they are there as if David was there. And they waited for Nabal. Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" Now, we don't know exactly how much was in the original conversation. But whenever it says, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" Uh, it would appear that when David went to tell the young men to tell Nabal that it's for David, it is with the understanding that Nabal knows who is David. So we cannot say that Nabal doesn't know David. Nabal knows David. But why did he say, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" These statements is a mocking, right? First of all, understand, Nabal is a very rich man. And guess how he treats people? Very stubborn, very cruel. And so you're beginning to see that this is a form of cruelty in his engagement. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? So this is mocking. The second part is this: there are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Everybody wants to be a master, right? And so the idea here is many servants, and it says David is one of those who broke away from Saul, his master. That's the insinuation. But obviously, David didn't, because they were reconciled in chapter 24. Of course, it was a private affair, and Nabal didn't know. So by hearsay, he thinks that David is now running for his life. So mockingly, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Being very stubborn and being very egregious. And that is verse 10. This is a depiction of his cruelty, a depiction of his stubbornness, a depiction of how he mistreats other people. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my sharers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? Now, understand that I do not know uh, doesn't mean he doesn't know David, whose origin that I do not know, uh, meaning Naval does not recognize the stature of David. Now, obviously, you could think that no, Naval being a very rich man, he's got no time. He doesn't care about anybody else except himself. So it's all about my bread, my water, my meat that I have sorted for my shearers. And so do not know means do not recognize. Who is David? Where did he come from? Why do I care about the son of Jesse? So that would be the general feeling of verses 10 and 11. So this would be a slap in the face, basically, on David, where everybody knows that David is actually the leader of 1,000 in the army of Saul. Although David has ran for his life, and that is probably what Naval thinks, and he thinks that David is a nobody in his eyes. And that would be an insult, really, an insult. And for all intents and purposes, Naval is not fair, not just in his dealings. And that is the key that I want to leave with you. For anyone who is rich, the Torah teaches that you are to take care of those who are less fortunate. Here is a man who is very rich, and there are people who have taken care of their young men, protected them, and yet Naval snubbed David because he doesn't think much of David. In fact, he doesn't think of David of anything at all. Doesn't recognize David and is made very clear who is David. He couldn't be bothered. So this is something which I suggest that you could see it as an unfair treatment, a mistreatment of David. Now, when David gets angry, that would be just. After all, David has defended Saul, defended Israel, protected the people, and defended Naval. And yet, this is what David gets in return for protecting Naval's servants. Verse 12. So David's young men retraced their way and went back. Now, the idea here, I think we need to look at this is there are a couple of Hebrew words that talks about this particular verse. The young men turned around. That's the first thing they did. To their way. Retraced their way. And it says, and went back. So, and return and come and reported. Now, the Hebrew expression is actually very vivid in its description, right? It's very action oriented. They turn around, return to where they came from, came to David, and reported to him. So this would be exactly what all these words will be. They came and told him according to all these words. So retrace their way, went back, they came and told him according to all these words. So why would the Hebrew do that? Because the Hebrew language is a very very action-oriented, very vivid in its description. Otherwise, it would say that so David's young men went home. That would be as good as how in modern uh, composition we would say it very briefly without describing the actions that took place. And so when the English tries to explain all these words, it's actually trying to help us imagine what the young men actually did in verse 12. And so David said to his men, after hearing all these words, each of you gird on his sword, get ready to fight. So each man girded on his sword. And David also girded his sword. And then about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. So think about it this way. We have David with a sword, right? David with a sword. And then we also have 400 men. Remember, David had 600 men, and this is following behind him. Now, 200 men stayed with the baggage. What baggage? Their tents, right? Their tents and their, well, I guess you can say their barang-barang, and then all the stuff that they bring while they are on the run. And so 200 defended the turf, 400 went with David, and David was single-minded to teach Nabal a lesson, because this is literally a royal slap in the face of one who is about to become king of Israel, because there is injustice that has been done against David. In verse 14, but one of the young men of Nabal told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, look, David sent messengers. Now this word messengers, malak, okay? And notice, these are the 10 young men. They were to go in the name of David. This is important because malak, for all intents and purposes, carries an understanding that they are walking on behalf of David. So in summary, they walk on behalf of David. So David didn't have to walk. The 10 young men walked. And so malak is translated as messenger. It's also translated as angels. Why? Because angels are spirit beings that walk on behalf of God. Messengers, on the other hand, are like these 10 young men who walk on behalf of David. And so this idea of messenger is very, very important. And so David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Now we have seen this greeting, right? And this word greet is not the word that we saw earlier on. The word here is to bless. There's peace be to you, peace be upon your house, and peace be upon everything you have. So there is a blessing. He comes in peace. So what did Nabal do? Naval, this word scorn literally means screamed at him, uh, literally means railed at him. So the words that we read about Naval, they aren't gentle words of question. They are words of mocking. That's why I have tried to help us understand the emotions that's going through the mind of Naval, at least as described in those two verses. And verse 14 confirms this. The messengers of David sends blessings. Peace be to you. Shalom be to you. Shalom be to upon your house. And shalom be upon all that you have. And in return, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Why must I do this? And yada yada. And that is what it means by scorn at them. He screamed at them. He railed at them. Now, these young men bore true witness. So look at this. The men were very good to us. Very good is very tov. These are the shearers, and the shearers is saying, the young men, the men of David were very good to us. We were not insulted. The word insulted is humiliated. Nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the fields. Now, what was this? We were not insulted, wasn't about insulted by David's men. It is insulted by other people who would try to, I guess you can say, bully them. And so they didn't lose any sheep. They continued to do their work as long as we went about with them. And this word here means together. As long as these shearers had David's men with them, nobody dare come near these men. And so this was the true witness that they actually had benefited from the protection of David's men. Furthermore, they were a wall to us both by night and by day. All the time we were with them tending the sheep. This is to talk about protection. Protecting them from their enemies, from people to bully, from people who want to steal the sheep, because they have a lot of sheep, 1,000, right? 1,000 of this and 1,000 of that. It's not an easy feat to take care of that. And yet they were in peace. We look at verse 17. And with verse 17, we should be able to have a background before we get into the next half of this chapter. He says, now therefore, know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household. He is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. So let's break this down. They are talking to Abigail. See, this young man recognized the intelligence and the wisdom of the woman. And so the woman needs to come to the rescue. It's a very unusual narrative, but one that we should sit up and pay attention to. The word know is to discern. Consider is to see. So we can know and see. This is an A and a B. That knowing and seeing are side by side describing the same thing. You must now look at the situation, understand it, size it up, and look at what we must do. And then it says that for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household. Now, it's important for us to realize, let's look at these two words, evil and plotted against. Now, evil means something that is not good in the eyes of the beholder. In whose eyes? In their eyes. Because if he's talking about the master, it would be all his household, and everybody behind the master would be looking at something which is not good for them. The word plotted literally means a determination, of an end, right? Plot against is a plan, an idea that they're trying to determine the end of Naval. That would be how this phrase would be understood, right? Then against his household, and that he is a son of wickedness. This word wickedness, it says worthless man, good for nothing. Right? This is what the Hebrew word means. He is, what else can you say? He is evil, right? He is wicked. These are all meanings of this word here. Now, this word here is Belial. Belial is he's a lord who is of completely no use. That no one can speak to him. No one can talk sense into him. And so this is a situation of hopelessness in the eyes of these young men who are shearers for Naval. Now, this is something which is very important for us to understand. We are going to stop here for this evening, and we will continue from verse 18 to the end tomorrow. But this is important because we need to understand why Abigail did what she did, because she now has knowledge as to what is about to take place, and her next steps will either make or break the entire household. And with this, we come to the end of our session today. Saul was diverted. Philistines invaded the land. Do you think God has a hand in it, a way to protect David? Possibly. Possibly. It's not stated in the text. It's not stated in the text. Some people say it's a coincidence. But I guess since it's in this text, I would tend to agree that behind this, the silent hand of God had come to give David a chance to run away. I think so, because God has said that he will not give David into the hands of Saul. And it's very near already, almost getting David, and yet he couldn't. And yes, I tend to agree that that might be the case. And with this, we will end here, although there's one more verse that's in the next chapter, but it's okay. We will continue tomorrow.